Get ready, because today we're going to talk about how to beef up your story's word count and why you may not want to do this. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of The Half Murders, and welcome to my writing channel. For today's video, we're going to focus on how to expand your word count, how to build a larger story. And I get questions about this from time to time. Usually a writer will have a situation where they have an idea for a novel and they write it out, but all they get is a story that's 20,000 words long or 30,000 words long. And that's not enough because novels are typically going to be over 50,000 words long. Then the question becomes, well, how do I take that 20,000 word story and expand it to 50,000 or more? And I want to stop right here because I want to say that this is often going to be a bad mindset for writing a novel. If you write something out and it's 20,000 words and you're beating yourself up, you're trying to, get to that 50,000 word mark, I think you're approaching it the wrong way. And the reason for this is because not every story is meant to be a novel. If you write a story and it's a good story and it's 20,000 words, it may be meant to be a novelette or a novella or something of that length. And if you do take that story and you try to expand it into something larger, you may end up killing the story in the process by adding filler or other issues to it. Now, with that being said, today we're going to discuss beefing up your stories. Specifically, we're going to focus on some tips that I have for you today. 4 of these tips deal with things that you should absolutely not do when trying to expand your word count. And then I have 3 tips that are things that you can do when expanding your word count. Let's start off by talking about the 4 things you should absolutely not do when expanding your stories. And the first thing to keep in mind here, you should not be adding filler or fluff to your stories. When we're talking about filler, we're talking about unnecessary action scenes, unnecessary sex scenes, unnecessary subplots, any unnecessary scenes that you just plug into the story in hopes of getting your word count higher. Second thing you should not do, you should not add unnecessary flashbacks. And this is something that I see a lot with TV shows, especially if you have a situation where the writers have to fill 12 episodes, but they only have enough material for 10 or 11. You'll often see a situation where you get these flashback episodes that come out of nowhere, and they're just there to show the past, what happened with the characters, just fill in some details that they may be nice, but they're not necessary. They don't push the current plot along. You got to be careful when you are including flashbacks in a story. In order for a flashback to work, usually you want to keep them brief, and you also want to make sure that the information that is conveyed in a flashback, you want to make sure that it's stuff that we really want to see, we really need to know. If you're just plugging in flashbacks for the sake of adding on word count, that's a bad strategy. It's only going to alienate your audience. Third thing you should not do, you should not write false conflict. And this is when you have conflict that is forced and manufactured by the writer. It doesn't arise naturally within the story. You could see the writers pulling the strings in these kind of cases. I think a great example of this would be anytime you see like a romance story where there's this convenient misunderstanding that keeps the couple apart until the very end. Those convenient misunderstandings, they're just there to kind of pad on the story's length. You don't want to do things like that. Don't have false conflict. Make sure it's natural stuff arising from within your story. And then the 4th thing you should absolutely not do, you should not tack on extra characters. If you have a situation where you're revising a story and you realize that you need an extra character in order for the plot to work or in order for a character arc to work, that's fine. But if you're just throwing in new characters for the sake of having more things to write about, again, not the best way of going about it. Don't add anything unnecessary to the story if you can help it. All right, now let's talk about 3 ways that you can beef up your story. And the first thing you can do is develop your story from within. This means that once your story's done, you take a look at it, you read through it, you flip through it, whatever it is, and you look for opportunities to flesh out these skinnier parts of your story. And here's what I mean by this. You may have some sections of your story where things are either underdeveloped or rushed. For instance, you might have a setting that is underdeveloped. Maybe a character walks into a house and you barely describe that house at all, either in the exterior or the interior, whatever it is. Now, instead of just, rushing through this setting description, you may want to go back and take a look at it and hit on the 5 senses. Tell us what we can see in this house, what it smells like, what kind of temperatures are going on, does the air taste like anything, maybe food's cooking or things like that. Hit on the 5 senses, see if you can flesh out your setting descriptions. Don't overdo it, of course, but try to flesh things out a little little more so that it draws the reader into the story. It creates atmosphere. Another thing you can keep in mind here is when you have some rushed character reactions. Obviously, when things happen to characters over the course of the story, they're going to have to react to it. So you might have a situation where an event happens and then your protagonist is reacting to that event. Now, currently, you may have a rushed reaction. You may have a character just having some knee-jerk reaction, and then they take action in order to push the plot forward. On the other hand, though, if you are revising your story and you see this rush reaction, maybe you can take it as an opportunity to flesh things out. For instance, once the event occurs, you can take us through the emotions that the character is feeling. Maybe their mind is racing, maybe their stomach's twisting, maybe their body temperature is going up. There's a lot of different possibilities. You can give us some details on what they feel inside their bodies. Then you can move on to what kind of thoughts are going through their head. Maybe their mind is racing to all different places. They're thinking about their loved ones, or thinking about how they're going to solve the problem, things like that. You can take us through these thought processes, and then they can finally take action as a result of what has just happened. Second thing you can do to beef up your story is redefine the scope of your main conflict. Sometimes you will write a story that has a main conflict that simply isn't big enough to fill a novel. And that's totally fine, but if you do want to revise that main conflict a bit to have it fill that scope of a novel, you can do this. For instance, maybe you have a story where a guy has been betrayed by someone and he wants to get revenge on that person. That might be able to fill a novel, or it might be too small. Now, if it is too small, what you can do, instead of having a guy get revenge on one person, you can have a guy get revenge on a group of people who have betrayed him. Or you might have a situation where characters go on a quest and maybe the hero is trying to collect some sacred artifact, and instead of just collecting one sacred artifact, maybe he has to collect the pieces of that sacred artifact, and that can expand the length of your story. It can also allow you to maybe fill in some subplots along the way. There's a lot of possibilities for expanding things if you tinker with the main conflict. And then the third thing you can do to beef up your story is add complications. Now, when we talk about this, we're talking about scenarios where characters are going after a goal, they're pursuing a goal, maybe they even get that goal, but once they do achieve that goal, it comes with unforeseen consequences, or there's a cost to be paid, or there's some kind of catch involved. And you might have a situation, for instance, like maybe a detective is investigating a crime, and maybe the detective finds some evidence that he needs, but that evidence links his daughter to the crime. That could be a complication because now he's trying to do his job and he's also trying to protect his daughter, and that's going to have him taking a different series of steps in order to achieve his goals. But the key thing to remember here is that stories are supposed to get messy. Characters are supposed to make mistakes along the way. They're supposed to face unforeseen consequences, and those consequences will force them to take additional steps in order to achieve their goals. Question of the day: what's your word count target for the story you're currently writing? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. The Half Murders is great if you like horror stories. It's about a woman and her daughter who enter a haunted house. They get chopped in half, and for them, the nightmare is only beginning. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. Maybe support me on Patreon. And as always, remember to keep on writing.